The first human warship didn't fire. It burned, crippled, surrounded, outnumbered 3-1. Dominion commanders ordered surrender. Instead, the human captain opened a channel and said, "Remember this moment." Then the ship detonated its own core, taking half the Dominion fleet with it. That was the day the galaxy realized something. They had misunderstood the word fragile. For 20 cycles, the Orion Council had classified humanity as biologically inferior. Low muscle density, breakable bones, short lifespan, emotional instability, official designation, structurally fragile species. They thought that meant weakness. It didn't. It meant we had more to lose. And when you give humans something to lose, you give them something to fight for. The first human warship did not fire its weapons. It was already dying. Its engines were broken, its shields were gone, and its metal hull was torn open by heavy plasma strikes. 3 destroyers from the Varex Dominion surrounded it in perfect formation. The Dominion ships were larger, stronger, and built for long wars. The human ship was smaller and already burning. Inside, alarms were screaming. Smoke filled the corridors. Gravity systems were failing. Many of the crew were injured. The Dominion commander opened a communication channel and offered surrender. He spoke calmly. He said the humans were fragile and outmatched. He said further resistance would only cause unnecessary death. He promised humane containment. On the bridge of the human ship, the captain listened without emotion. She looked at the tactical display. 3 enemy ships. No chance of escape. No reinforcements close enough to help. Survival probability below 5%. Some of her officers suggested surrender. Others stayed silent. They all knew what surrender meant. Titan Colony had surrendered. Titan Colony had still burned. The captain asked for damage reports. Reactor unstable. Life support failing. Weapons offline. The Dominion commander repeated his offer and added that this battle would be recorded for the Orion Council as proof of human weakness. That name meant something. The Orion Council had studied humanity for years. They had written reports about human biology. Weak bones, soft skin, emotional minds, short lives. Official classification, structurally fragile species. The Dominion believed that label completely. The human captain finally spoke. Her voice was steady. She ordered all remaining escape pods launched toward the nearby evacuation transports. She ordered all surviving crew to seal bulkheads and move to emergency sections. Then she gave a command that froze the bridge, begin reactor overload sequence. Some officers stared at her. One whispered that the blast would destroy them all. The captain nodded. She said, "Transmit this message on all frequencies." The communications officer opened every channel. Human and Dominion. Military and civilian. The captain leaned toward the microphone and said only 5 words. "Remember this moment very carefully." Then she cut the channel. Outside, the Dominion ships moved closer, confident the humans were about to surrender. Their sensors detected the rising energy levels inside the human reactor, but they reacted too late. The human warship turned slowly, aligning itself between 2 destroyers. The reactor reached critical mass. For one brief second, space became brighter than a star. The explosion tore through the nearest destroyer, breaking it in half. The shockwave hit the second ship and ripped away its engines. The third destroyer survived, but its shields collapsed and its hull cracked open. Debris scattered across orbit like burning rain. The evacuation transports escaped while the Dominion ships struggled to regain control. Across the battlefield, one message spread through every system. A fragile species had chosen destruction over surrender. That was the moment the Dominion realized something was wrong. Humans did break. Humans did bleed. Humans did die. But they chose how they broke. And when humans decided to fall, they made sure something else fell with them. For many years before the war, humanity had been observed, measured, and judged by the Orion Council. The Council believed it was wise and neutral. It studied new species, gave them rankings, and predicted their future behavior. When humans first entered interstellar space, they were not seen as a threat. They were seen as interesting but weak. Council scientists examined human biology in detail. They compared human bones to the reinforced skeletal frames of larger species. Human bones were lighter and easier to break. They compared human skin to armored hides and natural scales. Human skin was thin and easily cut. They measured muscle density, lung capacity, reaction time, and lifespan. In almost every physical category, humans rank below the galactic average. The reports were clear and simple. Humans were adaptable but fragile. They survived not because they were strong, but because they were clever. The Council created an official label that was shared with major powers like the Varex Dominion. The label said, "Structurally fragile species." At the time, it seemed accurate. Human ships were smaller. Human weapons were average. Human colonies required careful environmental support. Even human emotions were listed as weaknesses. Council psychologists wrote that humans formed deep attachments and reacted strongly to loss. They felt fear, grief, and anger more intensely than most species. In galactic terms, this was considered instability. Stable species made logical decisions even under pressure. Stable species retreated when survival odds were low. Stable species surrendered when defeat was certain. Humans did not always follow that pattern. This behavior was misunderstood. Instead of seeing emotional depth as strength, the Council recorded it as risk. Instead of seeing loyalty as power, they recorded it as vulnerability. When the Dominion reviewed the Council's files before attacking Titan, they were confident. They believed humans would panic after heavy losses. They believed Earth's governments would argue with each other. They believed public fear would slow military response. Everything in the data supported that conclusion. Humans argued often. Humans protested their own leaders. Humans disagreed about politics, culture, and history. To outside observers, humanity looked divided and unstable. The Dominion expected chaos. What they did not understand was the difference between internal conflict and external threat. Humans could argue endlessly with each other in times of peace. But when an outside force attacked, something changed. The same emotional intensity that caused division could also create unity. The same deep attachment that caused grief could also create determination. The Council never modeled that properly. Their simulations predicted economic slowdown after Titan. They predicted fear-driven migration away from border systems. They predicted diplomatic requests for protection. Instead, they saw something else. Global production numbers increased. Military enlistment numbers rose sharply. Communication traffic between rival nations became constant and coordinated. Human news networks did not show panic. They showed names, lists of the dead, faces, stories. The Council analysts were confused. They updated their projections, but the models still treated emotion as weakness. They believed humans would burn brightly with anger and then collapse from exhaustion. They did not understand that humans were used to long suffering. Human history was filled with wars, disasters, and rebuilding. Fragile bodies had survived harsh planets, disease, and internal conflict for thousands of years. The label structurally fragile described the human body, but it did not describe the human will. The Council made one critical mistake. They believed physical durability was the same as resilience. They believed that what breaks easily stays broken. They were about to learn that humans can break many times and still stand up again. And each time they stand harder than before. Titan was not a military world. It was not a fortress or a strategic command center. It was a mining colony placed in the outer orbit of a gas giant, built to extract rare minerals needed for starship construction. The colony was home to workers, engineers, teachers, and children. It had schools, small parks inside pressure domes, and long metal corridors that echoed with daily life. There were no heavy weapons on Titan, only light defense platforms meant to stop pirates. When the fleet of the Varex Dominion entered orbit, most people on Titan did not even understand what was happening. Large warships blocked out the stars. Communication signals were jammed. A single message was transmitted to the colony governor: surrender all facilities immediately. Dominion forces would take control of mineral production. Resistance would be eliminated. The governor replied that Titan was a civilian installation and requested negotiation through the Orion Council. The Dominion did not respond to the request. Instead, they gave 1 hour for evacuation. The problem was simple. There were not enough transport ships to evacuate 43,000 people in 1 hour. The governor sent emergency signals toward Earth, but help was too far away. Inside the colony, fear spread quickly but quietly. Parents held their children. Workers tried to access sealed shelters. Some believed the Dominion was bluffing. After all, galactic law discouraged attacks on civilian targets. But the Dominion did not consider Titan important enough to follow galactic law. At minute 59, Dominion ships repositioned in orbit, their weapons charged. The first plasma strike hit the main power grid. The colony lights went dark. The second strike destroyed the docking ring where evacuation ships were preparing to launch. The third strike shattered the largest habitat dome. Atmosphere rushed into space, pulling structures and people with it. Over 17 minutes, the bombardment continued. Defense platforms fired back weakly and were erased within seconds. Emergency shelters failed one by one as structural supports collapsed. Communications filled with screams, static, and broken signals. Then there was silence. When Dominion ships scanned the remains, they confirmed total structural loss. No organized resistance. Minimal military response. They recorded the operation as successful resource acquisition and sent their report to the Orion Council. Human resistance negligible. On Earth, the first full transmission from Titan arrived hours later. It was incomplete, damaged, and filled with gaps. But it showed enough. News networks replayed the images without sound. Governments held emergency meetings. Military leaders reviewed Dominion fleet movements. There were no loud speeches promising revenge. No immediate fleet launch. Instead, human leaders requested verified casualty lists. Names were collected carefully. Families were contacted one by one. Across cities and towns, candles appeared in windows. Public squares filled with quiet crowds. The silence confused outside observers. The Dominion expected panic. The Council expected political division. Instead, Earth grew very still. Production centers received new orders. Shipyards were placed on full alert. Research divisions were authorized unlimited emergency funding. The phrase, "We remember Titan," began appearing in broadcasts and official documents. It was not shouted. It was stated calmly and repeatedly. Titan was not a military defeat. It was a lesson written in fire. The Dominion believed they had demonstrated human fragility. What they had actually done was give humanity a single clear purpose. And when humans share a clear purpose, they become far more dangerous than anyone expects. After Titan, humanity did not rush blindly into battle. There were no reckless fleet charges and no dramatic declarations of total war. Instead, there was coordination. Within hours of confirming the destruction of the colony, emergency protocols that had existed only in theory were activated across Earth and its allied systems. Civilian factories that once produced consumer technology were converted to manufacture armor plating and starship components. Automotive plants began assembling armored ground transports. Aerospace companies shifted to building atmospheric fighters. The change was not chaotic. It was organized, scheduled, and precise. Governments that had argued for decades over budgets and borders signed temporary unity accords. Military command structures were simplified into a single joint defense network. Old rivalries were suspended without ceremony. The phrase, "We remember Titan," appeared at the top of internal directives, not as propaganda, but as a reminder of purpose. The Orion Council observed these developments with concern, but did not intervene. Council analysts still believed human unity would be temporary. They predicted economic collapse under strain. They expected protests against militarization. Those protests did not come. Instead, enlistment centers reported numbers beyond expectation. Veterans who had retired years earlier returned to service. Engineers volunteered for long shifts without complaint. University research departments redirected entire programs toward defensive innovation. Humans understood something clearly. The Dominion would return. The Varex Dominion, confident after Titan, continued advancing mining operations in nearby systems. They believed humanity would negotiate from fear. Instead, they began encountering small disruptions. Long-range scans of human shipyards showed accelerated production speeds. Trade shipments between human worlds increased instead of decreased. Financial markets stabilized faster than projected. What the Dominion did not see clearly was the speed of human adaptation. Dominion plasma weapons had overwhelmed Titan's weak defenses. Human scientists studied every fragment of recorded data from the attack. They analyzed plasma frequency patterns, shield penetration angles, and energy discharge timing. Within 11 days, prototype counter-frequency shields were tested in simulation. Within 3 weeks, the first upgraded defensive platforms were installed around major colonies. Human ship designers revised hull structures to better disperse plasma heat. AI-assisted targeting systems were trained on Dominion maneuver patterns collected from the Titan assault. Every piece of enemy behavior was examined. Humans did not need natural armor because they built better armor each time they were hit. They did not need superior weapons at the start because they improved them faster than expected. Dominion intelligence began reporting unusual efficiency in human logistics. Supply routes were guarded more tightly. Convoys traveled in unpredictable patterns. Communications encryption changed daily. The Dominion still believed in their advantage. Their fleets were larger. Their ships were heavier. But they had not prepared for an opponent that treated every loss as data. Human military doctrine shifted quietly from defensive posture to strategic disruption planning. Admirals studied Dominion expansion maps and identified weak supply corridors. Cyber units mapped communication relays. Special operations teams trained for long-range insertion missions. None of this was announced publicly. There were no loud threats broadcast across space. The mobilization of humanity was steady, disciplined, and patient. The Dominion believed they had shocked a fragile species into fear. In reality, they had triggered the most dangerous state humanity could enter: focused determination. And determination, once organized at a planetary scale, is far more powerful than anger alone. When the first major human fleet finally moved, the Varex Dominion believed they understood what was coming. Dominion admirals predicted a direct assault on their forward military bases. They strengthened defensive lines, positioned heavy destroyers near key systems, and prepared for a large frontal engagement. Dominion doctrine was simple and proven. Meet the enemy with superior force. Break their main fleet. Force surrender through overwhelming power. They waited for humans to follow that pattern. Humans did not. The first confirmed human strike did not target a warship or a fortress. It targeted a fuel depot located far from the main battle line. A small task force of fast human cruisers exited warp unexpectedly, launched precision missiles, and destroyed the depot in minutes. Before Dominion reinforcements arrived, the human ships were gone. At first, the Dominion dismissed the attack as harassment. But then a second report arrived. A supply convoy transporting ammunition to the front lines had vanished. Long-range sensors showed debris fields and disabled cargo carriers drifting in space. Again, no human fleet remained to engage. Over the next 2 weeks, communication relays along Dominion expansion corridors began failing. Some were destroyed by surgical strikes. Others were disabled by coordinated cyber intrusions launched from unknown locations. Dominion fleets started arriving at planned engagement zones without updated orders. Some ships ran low on fuel sooner than expected. Others waited for supplies that never arrived. Confusion began spreading through the command network. The Dominion expected bravery from humans. They expected emotional revenge attacks. Instead, they faced calculation. Human commanders understood that they could not win a direct confrontation against larger ships in open battle, at least not yet. So they attacked what allowed those ships to function: fuel, ammunition, communication, logistics. Human military academies had studied centuries of their own history. They knew that armies do not collapse only when soldiers die. Armies collapse when supply chains fail. Every Dominion weakness that could be measured was targeted. Human intelligence divisions mapped trade routes and calculated travel times between key systems. AI systems predicted which convoys were least protected. Special operations teams infiltrated border outposts and planted signal beacons to guide long-range missile strikes. Each action alone was small compared to Titan. Together, they created pressure. Dominion captains began requesting additional escorts for supply runs, which pulled warships away from offensive positions. Repair crews worked constantly to restore damaged infrastructure. Strategic timelines slipped behind schedule. The Orion Council monitored the conflict with growing concern. Their projections had assumed humans would fight emotionally and inefficiently. Instead, human operations showed restraint and discipline. They did not waste ships on symbolic attacks. They did not chase glory. They weakened structure. Dominion soldiers on the front lines began noticing subtle changes. Reinforcements arrived later than promised. Replacement parts were delayed. Orders sometimes contradicted earlier instructions. None of these issues were catastrophic alone, but they accumulated. Human forces were not stronger in direct combat yet, but they were forcing the Dominion to stretch their strength thinner and thinner across expanding territory. The Dominion had believed humans fragile because their bodies were easier to break. They were learning that systems built on confidence can also be fragile, and humans were very good at finding pressure points in systems that believed themselves invincible. The first true turning point did not happen because of a massive fleet battle. It happened because of a single decision made in orbit around Kepler 442. A group of civilian evacuation transports was escaping a contested system after Dominion forces pushed deeper into human territory. The transports were slow and lightly protected. Their only escort was one damaged human cruiser that had already survived 2 previous engagements. When Dominion destroyers intercepted the convoy, tactical predictions were clear. The cruiser could not win. It could not even survive for long. Standard military logic suggested retreat to preserve remaining firepower. Dominion commanders expected that retreat. Instead, the human cruiser positioned itself directly between the destroyers and the transports. It broadcast a narrow signal to the fleeing ships, ordering them to continue without slowing down. The Dominion opened fire. Plasma rounds tore into the cruiser's weakened shields. Armor plates melted away. Internal compartments depressurized. On Dominion tactical displays, the human vessel's survival probability dropped below 10% within minutes. Yet the cruiser did not attempt escape. It adjusted its angle repeatedly to absorb incoming fire while launching limited counterstrikes at targeting arrays. Dominion officers noted something unusual. The human ship did not prioritize self-preservation. It prioritized delay. Each second it survived allowed the transports to gain distance. Inside the cruiser, damage reports grew worse. Casualties increased. Still, the captain refused withdrawal. The Dominion expected panic at that stage. Instead, they intercepted internal communications focused on protecting the convoy. When the cruiser's main reactor became unstable, Dominion sensors detected a sharp spike in energy output. They recognized the pattern too late. The cruiser overloaded its core and detonated at close range. The explosion severely damaged one destroyer and forced the others to retreat temporarily. The civilian transports escaped. The battle log reached Dominion High Command within hours. Analysts attempted to model the behavior. Why sacrifice a warship for non-military vessels? Why choose destruction instead of surrender? The answer did not fit Dominion psychology. Dominion soldiers were trained to preserve assets for long-term strength. Humans repeatedly chose immediate protection of civilians over strategic conservation. This pattern began appearing in multiple engagements. Human fighters would intercept missiles aimed at cities even when survival chances were low. Ground units held evacuation corridors long after retreat signals were authorized. Dominion troops began reporting frustration. Human forces did not disengage when logically defeated. They resisted beyond calculated thresholds. This created hesitation. Dominion captains could not reliably predict when a human unit would break. The Orion Council reviewed these reports with concern. Council simulations still measured physical losses and resource depletion, but they struggled to quantify morale impact. Among Dominion ranks, a subtle fear began forming. It was not fear of superior firepower. It was fear of unpredictability. Humans did not follow the same rules of cost-benefit survival. They fought for families, for names, for promises made to people not even present on the battlefield. That motivation was difficult to counter. Dominion propaganda channels attempted to label human actions as irrational and desperate, but Dominion soldiers who faced humans directly described something different. They described determination that did not fade under pressure. The psychological balance began to shift. For the first time, Dominion commanders had to consider not just whether they could defeat human forces, but how much those forces were willing to endure before stopping. And the answer was becoming deeply uncomfortable. As Dominion Command reviewed repeated losses and growing delays, they reached a hard conclusion. Limited engagements were not enough. Harassment and supply disruption could be endured for a time, but if left unchecked, human pressure would continue increasing. The Varex Dominion decided to escalate the war. New fleets were deployed from core systems. Heavier warships entered the conflict zone. Instead of targeting only infrastructure, Dominion forces began attacking major human population centers near the frontier. Their goal was clear: break morale, force humanity into defensive desperation, show the galaxy that resistance carried unbearable cost. The first escalated assault struck a mid-sized colony world with limited military presence. Dominion ships established orbital superiority and began systematic bombardment of industrial districts. Human defense platforms fought back more effectively than those at Titan, thanks to upgraded shield frequencies, but they were eventually overwhelmed by superior numbers. Cities burned. Millions were displaced. Dominion Command transmitted a message across open channels stating that further resistance would result in similar actions across additional worlds. They expected fear to spread quickly. Fear did spread, but so did something else. Human emergency response systems activated with precision. Evacuation corridors were established using civilian and military ships working together. Planetary defense forces delayed Dominion ground landings long enough for population centers to clear. Medical fleets moved into orbit even before bombardment ended. Across Earth and allied systems, public reaction did not fracture unity. It hardened it. Volunteer enlistment numbers rose again. Industrial output increased beyond previous emergency levels. The Dominion had assumed that larger attacks would crush human resolve. Instead, each assault reinforced the belief that surrender would not guarantee safety. Meanwhile, human military leadership accelerated adaptive warfare strategies. New drone swarms were deployed to overwhelm Dominion targeting systems. Cyber warfare units infiltrated command networks, causing temporary sensor blindness during critical moments. Battlefield medicine advanced rapidly. Bioregenerative treatments reduced mortality rates among injured soldiers, allowing experienced personnel to return to combat sooner. Artificial intelligence systems processed combat data in real time, adjusting fleet formations mid-battle. The speed of innovation surprised Dominion analysts. Escalation was supposed to widen the gap in strength. Instead, it exposed how quickly humans learned under extreme stress. The Orion Council grew increasingly uneasy. Council members had believed that extended conflict would exhaust human economies and destabilize political systems. Instead, humanity appeared to be restructuring itself around the war effort with remarkable efficiency. Emergency powers were granted temporarily and reviewed regularly to avoid internal collapse. Information flowed quickly but carefully, maintaining transparency without spreading panic. Dominion forces began encountering coordinated counterattacks in regions they believed secure. Human strike groups would appear suddenly, supported by precise intelligence, hit strategic targets, and withdraw before heavy reinforcements arrived. Escalation was no longer one-sided. The Dominion increased force projection, but humanity increased flexibility. What concerned Dominion commanders most was not a single battle outcome. It was the pattern. Each time the Dominion raised the intensity, humans adjusted within weeks. There was no clear breaking point, no sign that human society was nearing collapse. Instead of shattering, the so-called fragile species seemed to compress under pressure and become denser, more unified, and more focused. Escalation had been meant to end the war quickly. Instead, it deepened it, and the Dominion began to understand that they were no longer controlling its direction. Months into the conflict, the war no longer followed the Dominion's original expansion schedule. What had been planned as a short campaign of intimidation had turned into a prolonged and expensive struggle. Resource consumption exceeded projections by a wide margin. Ship repair cycles were longer than expected. Replacement crews required accelerated training programs. Dominion economic advisors began reporting strain across multiple sectors. None of these problems alone threatened collapse, but together they formed a dangerous trend. The Varex Dominion had built its power on steady expansion and predictable dominance. Now that predictability was gone, human counterattacks were not always large, but they were constant. Border systems once considered secure required permanent fleet assignments. Supply convoys traveled with heavier escorts, reducing available ships for offensive operations. Intelligence reports grew more cautious in tone. Human fleets were no longer seen as scattered resistance. They were organized, disciplined, and increasingly effective in direct engagements. Improved shield systems reduced plasma penetration rates. Upgraded rail cannons punched through Dominion armor at closer ranges. Coordinated drone formations disrupted targeting locks. The Dominion still held numerical superiority, but the gap was narrowing in ways that were difficult to ignore. More troubling than material losses was the shift in morale. Dominion soldiers who had once viewed humans as inferior began expressing respect mixed with frustration. Human units continued fighting even after sustaining damage that would normally trigger withdrawal protocols. Civilian populations rebuilt destroyed infrastructure with surprising speed. Images circulated through Dominion networks showing cities restored within weeks of bombardment. Factories resumed operation under temporary shielding. Schools reopened in reinforced structures. The intended message of escalation had failed. Instead of fear, the Dominion faced resilience. The Orion Council convened emergency sessions to reassess the broader implications. Council analysts warned that if the war continued at its current intensity, destabilization could spread beyond the two primary factions. Trade routes across neutral territories were already disrupted. Smaller powers were rearming, uncertain which side might pressure them next. Quiet diplomatic inquiries began circulating. For the first time, some council members suggested mediation not to restrain humanity, but to prevent Dominion overreach from causing systemic collapse. Inside Dominion command chambers, private discussions grew tense. Admirals argued over strategy. Some demanded full total war commitment to crush human resistance decisively. Others warned that such a move would drain reserves dangerously. Casualty projections were updated again and again, each time showing higher costs than before. The phrase, acceptable loss threshold, began appearing more frequently in internal documents. The breaking point was not a single catastrophic defeat. It was the slow realization that the war was no longer producing clear advantage. Every gain required disproportionate effort. Every human setback was temporary. The Dominion had entered the conflict believing humans would fracture under sustained pressure. Instead, pressure had compressed human society into something stronger and more unified. The strategic question shifted from how to win quickly to whether continued escalation was worth the price. And once that question appeared at the highest levels of power, the direction of the war began to change. The final phase of the war did not begin with a dramatic battle. It began with hesitation. Dominion fleets still held contested systems, but their advances had slowed to a near stop. Strategic meetings within the Varex Dominion grew longer and more divided. Some commanders insisted that one overwhelming offensive could still break human defenses. Others argued that every offensive so far had strengthened human resolve instead of weakening it. Resource reports showed continuous strain. Shipyards operated beyond safe capacity. Civilian industries back home felt the pressure of redirected production. The war that was meant to demonstrate dominance had become a drain on stability. At the same time, human forces were no longer fighting only to survive. They were pushing back. Coordinated multi-system operations forced Dominion fleets to defend multiple fronts at once. Human intelligence units exploited every sign of overextension. Smaller allied species, once neutral, began quietly providing logistical support to humanity, not because humans were the strongest, but because they appeared the most reliable under pressure. The Orion Council recognized the danger of further escalation. If the Dominion collapsed internally, the resulting power vacuum could destabilize half the known sectors. Emergency mediation talks were proposed. At first, Dominion leadership rejected the idea. Accepting mediation implied weakness. But continued projections showed no clear path to decisive victory without unacceptable cost. Human fleets had proven capable of matching technological upgrades within months. Human society had shown no sign of political fragmentation. Casualty tolerance on the human side remained disturbingly high, not because they valued life less, but because they were unwilling to abandon each other. Eventually, private communication channels opened between Dominion and human representatives under Council supervision. Negotiations were tense and slow. Humanity did not demand annihilation. They demanded security guarantees, reparations for destroyed colonies, and recognition of sovereign borders. Dominion diplomats expected emotional outrage or reckless threats. Instead, they encountered calm, structured demands backed by clear strategic leverage. Humanity was no longer pleading for survival. It was negotiating from demonstrated resilience. When the ceasefire agreement was finally signed, it did not look like total victory for either side. but it marked a clear end to Dominion expansion into human space. Reparations were transferred in resources and technology. Military withdrawal schedules were established and monitored by Council observers. Across human worlds, there were no massive celebrations. There were memorials. Names of the lost from Titan and other battles were read publicly. Cities paused in silence. Then reconstruction continued. The Orion Council conducted its formal reassessment of humanity's classification. Previous designation, structurally fragile species. The data no longer supported that simplified label. Physically, humans remained biologically vulnerable compared to many galactic powers. That had not changed. What had changed was the understanding of resilience. Humans had endured sustained military pressure, heavy civilian losses, and economic strain without societal collapse. They had adapted technologically at exceptional speed. They had unified politically under threat. The new designation entered into official council records was concise, psychologically indestructible under external aggression. It was not poetic. It was analytical. The galaxy had learned a precise lesson. Fragile does not mean weak. Fragile means capable of feeling lost deeply. And when a species that feels deeply chooses to stand together, breaking them becomes far more costly than anyone predicts. The war ended, but the redefinition remained. Humanity returned to rebuilding, watchful and prepared, no longer underestimated. They called us fragile. They measured our bones, counted our years, studied our emotions, and they thought they understood us. But they never understood one thing. Humans do not fight because we are strong. We fight because we care. We remember every name, every city, every world that burned. And when we stand together, there is no force in the galaxy that can make us kneel. The Dominion learned that lesson. The Council recorded it, and the stars will remember it. Fragile does not mean weak. It means we have something worth protecting. And if you threaten what we protect, war begins. If you enjoyed this story of humanity rising against impossible odds, make sure you subscribe for more cinematic sci-fi journeys. Because the galaxy is vast, and humanity is just getting started.